The NBA playoffs are a mixed bag. At their best, they feature the most talented players in the world facing off in tight games with high stakes, but at their worst, they can be a 2-month run of lopsided series and tired rematches, culminating in a finals that may or may not even feature the two most deserving teams. It feels like there's always a debate lingering about whether the NBA should change its playoff format, but the commonly suggested solution has its own flaws, and probably won't happen anytime soon anyway. So, is there a better way to fix the NBA playoffs? With the current system, the NBA sees playoff rematches at a far higher rate than either the NFL or the MLB. An extreme example is the 2002 NBA playoffs, where the Lakers played the exact same three Western Conference teams they had met the year before. Also more common in the NBA are championship rematches and rematches in back-to-back seasons. The recent Warriors-Cavs finals trilogy is an example of both those things. But on top of that, the playoff bracket is often unbalanced, with some teams facing far easier paths than other, more deserving teams. For instance, the 2015 Cavaliers had an easier path to the finals than any team in the Western Conference, despite finishing behind 5 of them in the standings. And in nearly half of all the seasons since 2000, the teams with the 2 best records were in the same conference and were therefore denied a chance to face each other on basketball's biggest stage. So what's the answer to all this? Well, first we need to acknowledge that the best solutions will never happen. The real answer would start with shortening the early playoff rounds and the regular season, as well as reducing the number of playoff teams, but I sense neither of those things will ever happen for some reason. If anything, the NBA is apparently looking at expanding the playoffs, which is a whole other topic. Anyway, let's limit our options to what at least might get approved by 20 out of 30 NBA owners, which means we can't reduce the number of games or teams in the playoffs. Now, the commonly suggested solution that fulfills this criteria is to just take the best 16 teams, regardless of conference, and seed them 1 through 16, like a quadrant of the March Madness bracket. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver has even mentioned this as an option.
Either the best 16 teams, or even if we go 8 from the West, 8 from the East, seeding 1 through 16 going into the playoffs, and that is something that has gotten serious attention.
At first, this format looks pretty good. It produces a more balanced bracket, it will always give the teams with the 2 best records a chance to meet in the finals, and the matchups are about as diverse as they can get, since any team could match up against literally any other team in any round. A version of this has worked recently in the WNBA, which since the change has seen 2 straight finals between the Minnesota Lynx and the Los Angeles Sparks, a matchup that could never have happened under a conference playoff system. But the WNBA, with fewer teams, fewer games, and fewer decades of history, faced far fewer obstacles in making the change than the NBA would. And the 1 through 16 format does have problems when you consider how it would work in the NBA. As the league is currently constructed, the format would require unfair comparisons between the records of teams in different conferences who have played very different schedules. You could fix this by doing away with conferences altogether, but then you run into travel issues. A conference-less 82-game regular season would increase travel significantly, especially for teams on the coasts. And in fact, even if you left the unbalanced schedule intact, you would still have issues in the playoffs. Some teams would get lucky and match up against nearby opponents, while others would be flying from coast to coast for a month and a half in order to reach the finals. Just this year, assuming everything went according to seed, the Warriors would have to visit the Heat, the Cavs, and the Raptors to make the finals, while the Rockets would face the Timberwolves, the Thunder, and the Celtics, covering less than half the distance the Warriors would. You could imagine far worse scenarios. There are other logistical and sentimental obstacles to the 1 through 16 system too, from losing conference traditions to reducing local rivalries to even just figuring out how the TV schedules would work across time zones. There are a number of small but nagging issues that make the transition difficult. Perhaps it could happen someday, but Silver has made clear that for the moment, the NBA is sticking with 2 conferences. So, with both the current system and the 1 through 16 system showing some flaws, let me propose a third hybrid option. I believe this has the best of both systems and is a relatively small shift that, if successful, could potentially serve as a stepping stone for more dramatic changes later on. Here's the format. The first round plays out exactly as it does now. 8 teams advance from each conference and match up against other teams in their own conference, highest seed versus lowest seed, and so on. Then, in the second round, teams match up against a team in the other conference. So the winner of the Western 1-8 matchup plays the winner of the Eastern 4-5 matchup, the winner of the Eastern 2-7 matchup plays the winner of the Western 3-6 matchup, and so on. After that matchups depend on who advances, but if the top seeds win every series, the Western 1 seed would face the Eastern 2 seed in one semifinal, and the Eastern 1 seed would face the Western 2 seed in the other. In other words, the format is the same as the current system, except every other first round series gets flipped to the opposite side of the bracket. This is a way to get interconference playoff matchups, but with a relatively minor impact on the league as a whole. It would add a little bit of extra travel during the playoffs, but far less overall than a 1-16 system would require, since you don't have to change the first round or the regular season at all. Less than half of the series every season would be interconference matchups, and critically, it would also spread the travel more evenly. Every team would have to travel to the other conference at least once, but no more than twice, to reach the finals. In the same way, it would also create a more balanced bracket than the current system, because a team from an ostensibly weaker conference would have to prove itself by beating at least one and likely two teams from the other conference before reaching the finals. And whether the top two teams are in the same conference or not, they will always be on opposite sides of the bracket and therefore have a chance to meet in the finals. The format would also create more diverse matchups in both the early rounds and the finals. Rematches would be a lot less likely to happen year after year if the potential matchups in the first and second rounds were totally different, and the teams that met in the finals last year could very well meet in an earlier round this year. Finally, the system would have the happy side effect of making the regular season a little more important. There are only a few teams in each conference who have a realistic chance of making the finals, and as it stands now, exactly where these top teams finish in the standings does very little to change who they will have to beat to get there. But in the hybrid system, every spot a team climbs in the standings would change every single matchup they'd see in the playoffs. Like any system, the hybrid playoff system is not perfect, but it's a better balance between fair brackets and even travel, fresh matchups, and preserved traditions. It's a change that could easily be implemented now, and it would lay the groundwork for more tinkering down the road. Interconference playoff systems can work, and it's high time the NBA took the leap.